Hello everyone, welcome to another edition. This time going back to my roots, which is vehicle design. Um, and instead of the typical 2D process of starting off and finishing off completely in 2D, this time I'm going to be using a slightly more sophisticated process of first blocking out a model in 3D and then taking it into a rendering program to light and render, and then taking that screenshot into a 2D application to paint over and finish. So this first step is the 3D modeling phase. In this case, I'm using Autodesk Maya, and really you can use any application that's available to you. I'm using Maya just because it's something that I'm super familiar with. I've been using it for years. And I have a license for it. So for my purposes, Maya suits me just fine. But if you're a beginner artist and you're not, you're just looking into it, I would highly recommend Blender actually, because Blender is free. And yeah, there's a lot of hype going around Blender, and rightfully so, because it's a pretty powerful tool. And yeah, it's free. And it's got everything that pretty much Maya has. So yeah, if you haven't started looking into 3D applications yet, I would highly recommend Blender, and there's a lot of tutorials out there too. But like I said, this process that I'm doing here, you can really do with any 3D application. And yeah, like this model that I'm doing of the vehicle is very, very simple. It's not meant to be this like super complicated, super awesome model. It's really just a blockout. As you can see here, the geometry is really, really simple. It's just really modified boxes, and I'm only putting in as much detail as necessary. You know, the whole point of this this stage here is not really to create like this really, really high poly, really complicated, good looking model. It's really just to get the essence and the proportions of the vehicle that I'm designing, and just to get an interesting silhouette, right? So I'm not going to go in there and start adding details to every little nook and cranny. It's just really to get an overall look, which I will bring into to the next stage, so that I can create an interesting looking composition. And again, I'm not going into too much detail at the process here, but if you have any questions or anything you're curious about, please don't hesitate to leave a comment. And yeah, here I'm just adding little details just to kind of get really the essence of the vehicle design. And I'm not really going to go much further than what you see here. Just adding some finishing touches before I get back into the next stage, which is using Unreal Engine, which is I also highly recommend this. It's completely free, and this is what I'm using for the lighting and the rendering stage here. And Unreal Engine 5 is something that's fairly new, and it's a super powerful tool. I would say that it's actually a lot easier to use than the previous Unreal Engine versions, and there's also a lot of tutorials out there. So, you know, it's really something that's very easy to pick up and use, especially for this purpose here of just dropping in a model and putting in a few lights just to get a decent render. And much like the 3D processing stage, I'm not really going into too much detail here. I'm not trying to get like this this crazy real-time experience going. It's really just to get a screenshot with some decent lighting so that I can take it into Photoshop and paint over, right? And much like any other tool like Unreal Engine and Maya that I'm using, there's a ton that really you can do with it. I probably honestly know like 2% of these applications, but you know, I don't need to know every single bit of it. I only need to know as much as I need. And now finally here, I've gotten a renderer and a composition that I like, a nice blockout. And now I've finally taken it into Photoshop to do the final stage, which is the 2D paintover. And this is probably the most intensive part of the process. And it's also the most fun, to be honest. So the first two stages, the 3D modeling stage and the lighting and rendering stage, it's really just setting up the foundation for the piece. And the 2D paintover is where the fun really is and where the discovery really is. And here I'm playing with like some of the resources that that Unreal Engine has. It's got this this add-on called Quixel Megascans, and it's basically a library of assets that you can use to create a 3D scene. And here I'm trying to add some background elements, some terrain elements to the shot, which you'll see I'll actually end up completely removing from this piece altogether, because I thought that it took away from the essence of the art piece. But hey, it's all just part of the process, you know. It's never a linear process. It's always, you know, try something, see if it works. If it doesn't, yank it out, right? That's sort of where the challenge and the fun is. So here, going back and forth, the last stage and the second stage, going back and forth between Unreal Engine and Photoshop, just trying to add some last minute details to the final render. And now here back in Photoshop, adding some background elements before I get into the tank rendering. Now here I just added a quick overlay layer on top of the tank, just to get the blockout of the color. Now here, once I have a good idea of what I want to do with the overall color of the vehicle, I'm going in and adding, I'm starting to add the line details to the body using line work here. So just going in with a dark pen brush, and now just adding in all the detailing to the surface to really make the design look very interesting. So here I'm trying really hard to make the background look interesting, but all throughout the process I actually found it very, very tedious, and it just wasn't working. So like I said, you'll see later on that I completely just ditch it altogether and really focus on the vehicle itself. Now going back in with some more line work. And I'm also going in to soften up the hard corners. So when you import a very rough 3D model, as I did, you'll end up a lot with a lot of very hard corners. So what you'll need to do in Photoshop or the 2D application that you choose to use, you'll have to go in there and soften the edges with a brush. And here I'm actually adding some components that weren't there in the original blockout. But what's really, really useful about using a 3D blockout and lighting it and rendering it into an engine is that you get a lot of value information. You get a lot of information in terms of the light, the highlights, midtones, and the shadows. And then you can use that information. You can really just color pick those different parts and use it to create other components that weren't there to begin with, right? So you can really just sample that information and use it to build the model, use it to build the design up a little bit more. And that's really the power of this workflow, right? Is you get something that's really, really consistent. So as you can see here, the design is looking a lot more interesting than when I first brought it in. It's because I have all the tool sets that were given to me by that 3D render. And now the process starts really becoming really, really enjoyable and fun at this point. Because I've sort of defined my boxes. I defined the sort of the value range, and now I can just use that and play within those parameters. For example, like sampling the darkest shadow. So if I want to add another spot in the design with a very, very dark shadow, I now have that information to begin with, and I can use that to extend and expand on the design. Same thing with highlights and everything else. Now feeling pretty good about the design overall, playing with the colors a little bit more. Now still struggling with the background here, still trying to see if I could salvage it. Softening up the shadows at this point. So one of the things that you'll get when you render out a shot in 3D is that things look very, very sharp sometimes, and they look very artificial. So that's something that you'll have to be aware of when you go into the 2D process, and make sure that you soften those hard edges up and make it feel a lot more natural. So you see here I'm adding a little bit more beveling, and now just varying up some of the values here. Now adding some extra detailing, some additional components to the design. Again, going back in to soften some of the shadows. Yeah, at this point, starting to feel really, really good about it. Trying to adjust the values to really make sure that it stands out from the backdrop. So trying really, really hard at this point to see if I can really still salvage the background here. Trying to see if I can make the design really coexist with the backdrop. And at some point soon here, I'll just completely make the decision to ditch the background completely. I mean, the whole point of this was really the vehicle design. If I was doing an environment design, then that would be a different story. I would have definitely put a lot more effort into the environment in the 3D and the lighting and rendering part of it, if that was the case. But in this case, the vehicle really is the focus, so I'm going to completely just ditch it. And yeah, I ended up liking the result a lot better with this predominantly off-white gray background here. Yeah, it really, really helps to make the vehicle stand out. And yeah, color-wise too, the predominantly green vehicle with some yellow sort of stain, some stainage, and as you can notice that there's the orange sort of very, very sparingly used orange to be really used as accent colors. Really, really helps the design stand out a little bit. Like adding those really, really very contrasting colors, contrasting elements, and use it very, very sparingly, really, really helps the design feel very interesting. And I'm adding a little bit more of the orange here with some reflective lights or some reflectors, just to add the finishing touches. And here adding a little bit more sort of bounce light to kind of imply that the orange sand is bouncing up into the paint. Really, really helps the design really stand out. Really nice contrast with the green. And yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.